My parents favored my sister so much they spent my medical treatment funds on her instead. I refused my mother's selfish demands and cut ties. My aunt said, "No worries. You'll see." 10 years later, I opened my door, and the police were there. Now, everything changed. Look, from now on, this is your new home. Unfortunately, we don't need a sick person. I was suddenly told I was unwittingly taken by a car only to find myself at my aunt's house. Before I realized it, my father had declared that he wouldn't pay for my medical expenses in order to cover the costs of my sister's study abroad. Lost for words, I was in a daze, but my Aunt Journey welcomed me. "Sonia, won't you become my child?" she offered. From that day, I began a new life as the child of my aunt and uncle. And 10 years have passed. My name is Sonia. I have 2 sets of parents. I regard one set as the worst and deeply respect and cherish the other. You might wonder why I have 2 sets of parents. It's because my illness complicated the bonds within my family. Since childhood, Eve had frequent, unexplained seizures constantly requiring attention. While the symptoms are somewhat controlled by medication, stress and fatigue make seizures more likely, which is why my parents strictly told me to avoid exercise. I was always a mere spectator during gym class and couldn't play with my friends freely. On the other hand, my younger sister Null, who is 4 years younger than me, was energetic and talented, carrying all of our parents' expectations. As she grew up, she was particularly passionate about basketball. In elementary school, she joined a local mini basketball club that was well regarded, and her talent flourished. She later joined a famous sports club. Her skills improved remarkably, and in games she always played as a starting member. As a representative, she led the team and actively competed with older players during practice. I felt proud watching her, get a little envious. During this time, my parents began to make a clear distinction between how they treated me and Noelle. This was especially true in terms of meals. Noelle received nutritious homemade food, while for me it was mostly simple bread and instant soup. Sometimes I would get leftovers from what Noelle didn't finish. There was also a disparity in Noelle wore trendy children's clothes while I was given hand-me-downs for birthdays, Christmas, and school promotions. Noelle was treated specially, whereas I was often neglected. This discriminatory treatment became a part of my daily life. "Big sister, won't you play basketball with me?" My innocent younger sister would always ask cheerfully. She held the ball and looked at me with shining eyes. "Sorry, I can't do intense exercise." I reluctantly answered no, looked up at the sky, pondering, then suddenly smiled. "We can at least pass the ball, right?" she said as she tried to hand me the basketball. I thought I could handle just practicing passes, but my parents disagreed. My mother was especially strict. As I reached to take the ball, she forcefully shook off my hand and yelled, "Sonia, you never know when you might have a seizure, so don't do anything." Startled by her shouting, my sister froze in place. The ball dropped to the ground and slowly rolled away. Picking up the ball, my mother returned it to my sister with a smile. "No, let's practice passing together," she said after glancing at me. She spoke kindly to my sister and walked away with her. After they left, I felt the deep sadness and irritation, and I cried alone. A memorable event occurred when I was in the first year of middle school and Noelle was in the 3rd grade of elementary school. On a spring day, I felt unwell from the morning and was bedridden due to my sister's important game. My parents left me at home and went to the match. When I'm feeling ill, it'll be more likely for me to have seizures, I thought. The overlap of feeling unwell and being left alone heightened my anxiety, accumulating stress, and by noon I had a severe seizure. Feeling the danger, I immediately called an ambulance. When I woke up, I was on a hospital bed. Just as I woke up, a nurse who came to change my four noticed and smiled at me. "Sonia, you're in the hospital, do you understand me?" she asked, and I nodded in response, looking carefully around. There was no sign of my family in the hospital room. "Excuse me." As my family visited, I asked, "The family is scheduled to come tomorrow morning." "You'll be on your own tonight," the nurse replied. This confirmed that my parents and sister had not yet returned from the basketball trip. Even when I'm taken away by an ambulance, nobody's worried about me. It's like I'm not family, just a nuisance, I thought to myself. As tears welled up and blurred my vision, I covered my head with a blanket and cried silently. After being taken away by an ambulance, my parents, facing criticism from the neighbors, started leaving me at my aunt's house, who is my father's sister. My aunt and uncle work at a game development company, and as they had no children of their own, they were always happy to have me over every week. It's fun having Sonia around. It's like having our own child. My aunt would always say they loved games and would teach me about their favorite ones, which made me look forward to visiting. One notable game was when they developed Together set in a fictional world. It was incredibly engaging, and I would play it for hours. They always served me the same meals they ate themselves. My aunt's cooking was exceptional, and I often asked for seconds. I've always wanted to pick out children's clothes, my aunt said as she joyfully chose clothes for me. Visits to my aunt's house became my emotional support, making me feel cherished and providing a place of solace. As the first term of my first year in junior high came to an end and summer vacation was approaching, my father took me to my aunt's house. The car was packed with luggage, and I was excited about the prospect of spending the summer vacation there. After arriving and unloading my things, my father unusually came inside, appearing to be in a good mood, but my aunt looked concerned. Feeling the unusual atmosphere, I began to feel anxious. However, since my relationship with my father was not very good, I couldn't ask him directly about my concerns. While I was trying to gauge the situation, my father spread his arms wide and cheerfully said, "Look, from now on this is your new home. Unfortunately, we don't need a sick person." I was shocked, and my father's voice was jovial. Even though my aunt and other relatives were angry, it seemed my parents were not listening. Their minds were completely occupied with my sister's basketball scholarship abroad. "To cover the costs of your sister's study abroad, we won't pay for your medical expenses," they said. No matter how much my aunt and uncle tried to persuade them, their efforts did not reach my parents. "If you stop the treatment for her illness, I will take Sonia in," my aunt declared resolutely. My parents readily accepted the proposal. That's how I learned that my parents had let go. My parents readily accepted the proposal. That's how I learned that my parents had let go of me. Speechless and shocked, my aunt gently spoke to me. "Your father said you wanted to leave home too. That's why I agreed. But seeing your reaction now, it seems you weren't told anything. There's still time to fix this. You should have a proper talk with your parents and reach a conclusion. Is it still possible? Now we might be able to talk. But repairing my relationship with my parents feels too late. I can't think of them as family anymore." I shook my head vigorously as I met my aunt's gaze. "If it's okay with you, Annie, I want to stay here. Sonia, I promise I won't be a burden. It'll help out around the house actively. So please let me stay here." I stood up slowly and begged her. If I were driven out of this house, I would have nowhere else to go. "I want to live in your house, Annie. Please." I pleaded, my voice quivering. A sense of confusion hung between my aunt and uncle. I was anxious about how they would react, unable to stop my body from shaking. Then my aunt gently stroked my head. "Sonia, won't you become our child?" I looked up to see my aunt and uncle smiling warmly at me. "Yes, please," I answered, tears of relief flowing. My aunt, tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly. My uncle, wiping away his tears, watched over us. From that day, I became the child of my aunt and uncle. Eventually, we completed a special adoption process, and I legally became their child. Thanks to this, I was able to actively participate in physical education classes and enjoy playing with my friends. I also saw an improvement in my health and rarely worried about my illness anymore. I'm truly happy to be living with my aunt and uncle. Afterward, I started competing in trading card games. Despite the risk of seizures, my aunt and uncle did not stop me, but supported me, allowing me to focus on the competition. A strong desire to repay them someday was born in my heart. I joined the trading card club upon entering high school. This school's trading card club is well known in the competitive trading card world. I was excited to grow and develop in such a stimulating environment, and I was happy to showcase my abilities. In my second year of high school, I won the national championship, surpassing other prestigious schools. Unable to contain my joy, I ran home that day to share the good news with my aunt and uncle. By then, the seizures from my illness had almost completely stopped. Before graduating from high school, I was informed by a doctor that my illness had completely healed and I had become as healthy as my sister. After high school, I continued competing in trading cards with my aunt and uncle, always supporting me. When I performed well, they celebrated my success as if it were their own. I started to achieve stable, good results after turning 20. Now at 22, I am known as a top player and recognized as the queen of trading cards. It has been about 10 years since I was taken in by my aunt and uncle. I thought it might be time to give something back. Christmas is coming up and I want to make my aunt and uncle happy. I made plans while feeling the cold winter air on my way home. Upon arriving, I noticed several unfamiliar shoes at the entrance. "I'm home. Is someone here?" I asked as I entered the house. In the living room, a high school girl was sitting on the sofa, and my aunt greeted me as I walked in. "Welcome back." Who is this girl?" I asked reflexively, but she seemed familiar. "Wait, that face."
"No, Sonia."
I heard her voice. She had grown so much that I didn't recognize her immediately, but she still had traces of her younger self. When I called her name, her face twisted as she began to cry. "Sonia, you remembered me. I'm so glad."
She said yes.
"What's going on?" I was unsure how to react, but then my aunt started to explain. "Null ran away from home."
"What?"
I exclaimed, looking at my sister in surprise. Null nodded, wiping away her tears. "Ran away? What do you mean?" "Sonia, help me," Null said with a trembling voice. Then she began to tell me about what had happened at home. It seems that my father driving me out of the home was a huge shock for her. Noelle had pleaded with our parents, crying, "I'll quit basketball. Just let Big Sis come home." However, our father harshly scolded her. "What are you saying? It was all for your basketball. You shouldn't do things half-heartedly. I won't accept you quitting. You are your mother's only child. You should work hard and become a respectable player," my mother said in a chilling voice, refusing to take Noel's words seriously. My parents had thoroughly controlled Noelle's life, forcing her into a basketball-centric existence against her will from childhood until she was a senior in high school. During a career counseling session, Noelle finally mustered the courage to declare her separation from basketball. Our parents were furious, and my father accused her with a terrifying voice. "Hey, do you have any idea how much money we've spent? Your sister sacrificed for you. You're not allowed to stop until you turn pro." Feeling mentally cornered, Null escaped to my aunt's house to get away from the situation. "I had no idea you were in such a situation, Null." I was at a loss for words. While I had been freely raised in my aunt and uncle's home, my sister had been sacrificed by our parents. "Noelle, you've been through a lot. I didn't know anything." "I'm sorry," I said. My sister quickly shook her head in surprise. You've been through so much for me, and still am asking for help." "I'm really sorry," Noelle said, looking down. Her small shoulders were trembling. "Don't worry about it." "I'm really happy you came here," I replied cheerfully. My aunt and uncle nodded in agreement. "That's right. It was good to escape from them." "Noelle, relax. Your big sister will protect you," I said, though deep down I felt fear and reluctance to get involved. I want to save Noelle, but how should I do it? I thought and began to make plans. The day to execute the plan was Christmas, a cold day under a winter sky that threatened snow. Returning to my parents' home for the first time in 10 years, I gathered my courage and pressed the doorbell. The door was opened forcefully, and my parents greeted me with "Welcome back." "Oh, we've been waiting for you," said my father. My parents greeted me with unnaturally bright smiles. They must have known about my return through my aunt. They should also understand that it was about my sister. "Welcome back. Waiting? What are you talking about?" "After you threw me out," I questioned their attitude, feeling puzzled. My mother, with a cloying voice, took my hand as she spoke. "Come on, it's cold. Let's go inside." "No, it's fine here. I'm busy and can't stay long," I replied shortly, and their faces clouded over for a moment before they quickly put on 4 smiles again. Then they began to speak loudly, in an unnatural way. My parents kept those 4 smiles on their faces, insisting that I step inside the house. They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, while I stood firm at the doorway, refusing to take a single step forward. "Look, Sonia, we know what we did in the past was harsh, but you're our daughter, aren't you?" my father said, trying to soften his voice, though it sounded fake coming from him. "And now that you're such a famous player, don't you think it would be good to start fresh? To work together?" I furrowed my brow, unable to believe what I was hearing. They were acting as if nothing had happened, as if the last 10 years of abandonment and neglect were just minor details. "Work together?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You really think you can just show up and pretend to care about me after you threw me away?" My mother sighed, stepping closer with an expression that tried to seem affectionate, but her eyes betrayed a cold, calculating glint. "Sweetheart, we know we made mistakes, but people change. And well, you're a champion now, right?" She glanced over at my father, as if seeking his support. "Just imagine what we could accomplish together. The recognition you've earned, it's everything we ever wanted for Noelle. If you joined us, think of the opportunities." I felt my stomach turn with disgust. They didn't care about me, They didn't want a real reconciliation. They wanted to cash in on the reputation I had built with my hard work while they had ignored me completely. You mean you want to use me? That's what you really mean, isn't it? I asked, my voice bitter, barely able to contain my anger. Did you not hear a single word Noelle said? She was suffering while you pressured her, and even now you only think about yourselves. My father stepped forward, the smile dropping from his face, replaced by a stern expression. That's not how things work, Sonia. You owe us. We made sacrifices for you, for your treatment in the beginning, until we realized Noelle's future was more promising. Now it's your turn to repay us. His voice took on a harder edge, his arms crossed as if asserting his authority. Don't you think you've enjoyed enough of this free time with your aunt and uncles? I felt my blood boil with rage. The coldness and manipulation in his words made me want to scream. Instead, I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out shaking with anger. Free time? You abandoned me. You dumped me on aunt and uncle while you focused everything on Noelle. And now, just because I managed to make something of myself, you think you can drag me back in? What kind of parents do that? My mother, still trying to keep a calm facade, grabbed my arm and squeezed it, making me flinch. Her expression turned frustrated, almost angry. It's our responsibility as parents to make the hard decisions, Sonia. We did what was best for Noelle, and now it's time for you to do what's best for the family. We invested so much in her, but now you have a chance to help us. Don't be ungrateful. That word, ungrateful, hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt like every attempt they made to manipulate me was a knife twisting deeper. I'm not ungrateful. I spat back, my words full of pain. I'm someone who finally found a real home away from you. You have no right to demand anything from me after everything you've done. I don't owe you anything. My mother's forced smile finally faded, replaced by a sneer. Sonia, do you think you can just discard us? You don't understand your responsibilities. Without us, you would have gotten nowhere. I laughed, a bitter, hollow laugh, because the irony was impossible to ignore. You really think you helped me in any way? You did nothing but use me as an excuse to focus all your efforts on Noelle. I made it on my own, with aunt and uncle's help. And you know what? I'm the champion you never deserved. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me, darker than before. If you walk away now, don't think we'll make things easy for Noelle. She only came back to you because she had nowhere else to turn. We still have the final say over her. His threat hit me like a low blow. I turned back to face them, feeling the fury bubbling up inside me. You still think you can control Noelle? That you can use her to manipulate me? You really are despicable. My mother, realizing she couldn't win me over with words, tried one last tactic. Sonia, dear, there's still time to change all of this. Believe me, we want you on our side, to be the player that brings us pride. Your sister, she would be happy about it deep down. And we both know she needs you, that you should do what's right for the family. I took a step back, feeling a wave of revulsion wash over me. That was the final straw. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice icy and direct. The only right thing for this family is for you to leave me alone and stop destroying Noelle's life. And if I have to protect my sister from you, then so be it. But I'm not going to be a part of anything you call a family. I turned and walked away, ignoring their last desperate attempts to call me back. My mind was made up, and I knew that now the battle to free Noelle from their clutches had only just begun. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't let my parents destroy her the way they tried to destroy me. Deep down, a part of me hoped that one day they'd realize they lost not just one, but two daughters. But for now, my priority was helping Noelle rebuild the life that our parents had shattered. And this time, I wouldn't fail. I quickly realized that my parents were only interested in one thing: money. From the moment I stepped into their house that day, every word, every forced smile, had been a thinly veiled attempt to exploit my success and fame for their own benefit. They didn't want a true reconciliation, and they certainly weren't concerned about Noelle's well-being. She was just another pawn in their game, just as I had been for years. And that was something I couldn't allow anymore. So, I made a decision that would change everything. I would fight for Noelle's custody. I knew I had the means to support my sister. I was independent, financially stable thanks to my achievements in the trading card game world, and, most importantly, I wanted to give Noelle the freedom she had never had under our parents' control. I spoke with my aunt and uncle, and they agreed to support me. We hired a skilled lawyer and filed for adoption so that Noelle could legally become my responsibility. Of course, when my parents received the notice, they were furious. They tried to intimidate me, claiming that I would never win, that they were the biological parents, and that the court would take their side. But I was determined. Throughout the process, I presented evidence of the neglect I had suffered in the past, along with Noelle's testimony about how she was forced to pursue a life centered around basketball against her will. My parents tried to argue that they had made sacrifices to raise champions, but the documents we gathered, along with testimonies from my aunt and former neighbors, painted a clear picture of emotional abuse and neglect. After months of hearings and tension, the verdict day finally arrived. The judge, after reviewing everything, ruled that my parents would lose custody of Noelle. I would become her legal guardian. The look on their faces when they heard the decision was one of pure rage and frustration. My father even tried to approach me in the courtroom, but security intervened before he could do anything. But I knew that this wouldn't be the end. My parents were vengeful and obsessed with controlling Noelle. So, right after gaining custody, I filed for a restraining order to keep them away from us. And to my surprise, it was granted without much difficulty. The court recognized the risk they posed to Noelle's emotional and physical well-being, and they were barred from coming near us under any circumstances. In the following months, their attempts to contact Noelle were thwarted. They tried to arrange encounters in public places, but with a restraining order in place, any attempt they made to get close was immediately shut down. Gradually, they began to realize they had no more power over us. Over time, Noelle started to rediscover herself. She decided she no longer wanted anything to do with basketball. The constant pressure from our parents had destroyed any passion she might have once had for the sport. Instead, she found a new path, becoming a digital influencer, sharing her story and helping others who had faced similar pressure from their families. She found her voice on social media and, surprisingly, started making good money doing it. Sponsorships, partnerships, awareness campaigns. It was everything she had always wanted, but without our parents' shadow looming over her. Slowly, she became a role model for her followers, inspiring thousands to take control of their own lives and not let others dictate their paths. I felt so proud to see the light back in her eyes, to see her building something that was truly hers, without anyone else's demands. Together, we finally felt like a real family. The nights of tears and fear were replaced by smiles and plans for the future. Meanwhile, our parents continued to curse us from afar. They couldn't accept that we were finally free, that Noelle had found her own way, and that, ironically, she was far more successful than they could have ever imagined. To them, it was unfair that we had managed to thrive without them, that we had rebuilt our lives away from their control. But the truth was, the only thing that had been unfair was everything they had put us through for so many years. And now, it didn't matter what they thought or said. We were finally free, protected by a legal distance they could never cross. And I knew that whatever the future held, it would be a future that we chose for ourselves. No more impositions, no more manipulation, and, most importantly, no more of them.